Good morning. My name is Catherine Loughnane, and it gives me great pleasure to bring you the good news this morning on Thursday, May the 13th. Our gospel reading today comes from Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 to 20. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." Not a very long passage, but my goodness, is it packed full of important information for us. It is thought that the Gospel of Matthew was written between 80 and 90 AD, we now call it the Common Era, by a Jewish follower of Jesus, perhaps based in Antioch, who was writing for a primarily Jewish audience. This passage is not found in any other gospel. It is made up of information uniquely available to Matthew and a quote from a hypothetical manuscript of the sayings of Jesus, which is known to biblical scholars as Q. The gospel ends dramatically on a mountaintop in Galilee. This is not surprising, as mountaintop encounters are a biblical trope and have long been considered thin spaces where divine and human interchange can take place. Jesus, who has unambiguously revealed his divine identity, is being worshipped by the 11 apostles, who are no doubt prostrated on the ground before him. His parting instructions to them are to baptize and teach all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and he assures them that he will remain present until the end of time. Although we have all grown up with it, and it is embedded in our liturgies, rituals, and hymns, I confess that I have trouble with the word worship, which is freighted with historical, political, and cultural nuances. Long before the birth of Christ, kings were worshipped, and in today's Psalms, written between the 9th and 5th centuries BCE, God is depicted as a king, to be ritually worshipped. In the 1st century of the Common Era, when Jesus was among us and this gospel was written, the culture was Hellenistic, and Palestine was ruled by the Roman emperor. Pagan emperors were considered living gods and were ritually worshipped. Their sons were called sons of God. Jews and early Christians refused to worship the emperor. After Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, many of our liturgical rituals, as well as our vestments, were inspired by the etiquette and dress of the imperial courts in the western and eastern halves of the Roman Empire. The Church upheld the concept of the divine right of kings for centuries, lending legitimacy to the action of rulers who believed they had received the kingship from God. Because the concept of divinity of Jesus was difficult for the Matthean community to deal with, the evangelist began his gospel by retracing Jesus' origins and showing him to be the Son of God from birth, fulfilling the messianic prophecies of the Old Testament, and sent as a Messiah to Israel alone. What is truly remarkable is the fact that Matthew mentioned that some of the apostles doubted his divinity. This not only gives the passage credibility, it is reassuring to know that when we go through periods of doubt, we are not the first and not alone. If we find ourselves falling into a state of spiritual desolation, it is consoling to focus on the sentence with which Matthew ends his gospel. I am with you always to the end of the age. The sightings of Jesus following the crucifixion not only reinforced belief in the resurrection, they fueled the ministries of the disciples and led to the rapid spread of Christianity. The ministry of Paul, who knew the apostles and witnesses to these extraordinary events, began only 16 years after the death of Jesus, at least 15 to 30 years before the earliest canonical gospel, the Gospel of Mark, was written. Paul's letters are an unrivaled source of information about early Christianity. In today's reading from Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 to 18, Paul talks about God's gift of the Holy Spirit. I like to think of God not as a king or emperor, but as a spirit, both transcendent in the cosmos and immanent in each one of us, regardless of our race, color, or creed. In this passage, Jesus commissions the apostles to baptize and teach all nations. In the sacrament of baptism, the Spirit is invoked, and the candidate is welcomed into the Christian community. As New Testament scholar Scott Lewis points out, the Bible can be dangerous if read literally. Much harm has been done over the millennia by conquering monarchs and zealous missionaries, for whom baptism was linked to subjugation and colonization. Jesus commissioned the apostles to teach all nations. Teaching and learning are, of course, interconnected. Today, thanks to globalization and technology, we can all learn about and participate in the vitally important conversations taking place around the world. We can look to find ways of working for the common good, to bring about social justice, and explore ways of sharing our resources as a way of showing love for our neighbors. One of the ways we can do this at present is by speaking out against vaccine nationalism and sharing our vaccines with India and other countries and continents in need. As we grow and mature, we develop our own spiritual paths and become aware that there are many great spiritual traditions, all of which converge at the level of mystical experience. Today, we are engaging increasingly in interreligious dialogue, exploring the richness of other inspired spiritual traditions, and not surprisingly finding resonance and connections between them. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all espouse the same maxim: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Some combine traditions. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton called himself a Christian Buddhist, and a French Catholic priest and monk founded a Hindu Benedictine ashram in India. In our own parish, we've been given an introduction to the wonderful spiritual richness of the Anishinaabe religious tradition, which is so full of the Spirit. Just as Jesus called the apostles to baptize and teach, he calls all of us to ministries rooted in our passions and gifts. They may not remain static. They may evolve as our knowledge of the universe, the world, and ourselves keeps changing. Today, the word worship means to me aligning myself with Christ's teachings, taking note of the great insights and changes that are taking place, and looking to the Spirit for guidance as to how to best contribute to making this a better world. I leave you with that thought and want to thank you again for listening and for being part of this great community of faith. Have a good day.